If you don't want. All right, so welcome everyone. I am Kimberly Wilburn, and I am a board member of Plymouth Area Indivisible, which includes Plymouth, Minnetonka, and surrounding cities. And I am joined by fellow board members Greg Layden and Claire McIver. And oh, and Millen. Sorry, Millen. I didn't see you down there.
That's all right.
And Millen Sohani. Today we have Lindsay Turner here, who's with People Over Prosecution. And Lindsay is going to talk to us a bit about what the Hennepin County Attorney does and why it's important. And so, Lindsay, if you want to just tell us a little bit about your group first, and then you can go right into telling us about the county attorney.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the invite and everybody carving out the time to be here tonight. It's lovely to be in this little online cubby with you. I am gonna get a link to the slides out to folks, but I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and so because I'm kind of a visual person too, and walk you through our quick presentation. Are we seeing this amazing branded People Over Prosecution vote with pop situation? Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so Lindsay Turner, she, her pronouns. I'm with a small group called People Over Prosecution, and tonight, super excited to talk to you about kind of the history and the values of People Over Prosecution, why we are laser focused on the Hennepin County Attorney's race, and what it means to vote with people over prosecution. Before we get to that point though, you all are humans. You're not just like little squares in my computer. And I would love to do a round of introductions, names, pronouns, and a quick maybe sentence about why you're interested in learning more about the Hennepin County Attorney's race. And since I'm off mute, I will go first. I am Lindsay Turner. I use she, her pronouns. I am super interested in electing a transformative Hennepin County prosecutor because I know from a variety of hats that I've worn over my adult life that the way that we respond to harm with cops, courts, and cages actually is in opposition to human dignity and to safety. And I am very interested in divesting from that system and at the same time investing in a system that responds to harm in ways that both repair the harm and create conditions that are necessary for safety in the future. And I will call on Greg to introduce yourself, name, pronouns. Why are you interested in this race?
Just quickly, I'm Greg Layden, and he, him, sorry. And I'm a director in PAI, and I'm interested in this because I think the Hennepin County Attorney race is critically important because of things that have happened recently, culminating with the Chauvin trial as not the last thing, but the peak thing, the thing that people saw. Hennepin County Attorney General, County Attorney Office is the most important single law enforcement office right now on the planet Earth, because this is the epicenter of a major event that's happening that is like similar to the Rodney King event, which is something we all saw. This is something we all saw. When I say we, I mean our species all saw. So whether you're in Hennepin County, whether you're nearby, if you're in Minneapolis, or if you're in St. Paul, next county over, or whatever, this seat, and whether you live in this county or not, this is a critically important election. And let's just say it's a critically important position that these people are running for, that we're going to be talking to. So that's why I'm here. Are we going to popcorn?
I don't know what that means to this group. I've seen it mean different things in different spaces. Greg, if you could just pass it to the next person.
I'm going to pass it to Clara, because she's next on my screen.
Oh, okay. So Clara McIver, she, her, which actually says that. I am interested because I am tired of doing the same old things and getting lousy results. I think we can do better if we really concentrate, think it through. And apparently we have a huge selection. I mean, 6 people running is amazing. So this is our big chance. Let me pass it to, oh yeah, I'm on the leadership group of PAI. So that's why I'm going to pass it to Milland.
Okay, last in, first out, right? Milan Sohoni, he, him, his, I guess. I don't know much about what the county attorney does, and that's why I'm here to listen, to learn. I know it's a very important position, but I want to learn first before I even make up my mind as to who I will support and why I will support them. I will pass this on to Kimberly.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Wilburn. As I already said, I'm on the board of Plymouth Area Indivisible. And I ran for Hennepin County Commissioner back in 2020 and then ran for City Council last year. And racial equity and public safety are two of my issues. And I have some feelings about the current county attorney and choices that have been made that I discovered through my organizing work. And so it's a critical position, and I think we can do so much better. And I will pass it on to Colleen.
Oh, hi, Colleen Miner, she, her. I am on the board of MN03 and also on the board of Edina Indivisible, MN03 Indivisible, I should say. And I'm here because one of the areas I'm not really well versed in, and it is so important. And I need a little direction toward candidates and their views. And I hope we get more of that. So thank you.
Colleen, can you pass it to somebody, please?
Okay, I will pass it to Bill Kemmerer.
Hi, so I'm Bill Kemmerer, he and him. You know, when, who was it now? Milland gave his pronouns, my audio dropped out momentarily, and I thought I heard him say he, him, and is. And I thought, well, that's interesting, sort of existential. So I was wondering whether was is an alternative, but anyhow, I hang out with and participate with the Edina Indivisibles. And I'm here for pretty much the reasons that Greg said, that the Hennepin County Attorney's role is very important given the recent history in the Twin Cities. And with so many people running, I want to be informed. So here I am. Let me pick somebody who's trying to remember who has not. How about Julie Rasmussen?
Thanks, Bill. I'm Julie Rasmussen. I'm in St. Louis Park, and I work with Edina Indivisible and also am part of the West Suburbs Isaiah Faith in Minnesota group. I'm here to learn. I keep hearing cries for longer sentences, and I feel like the data is pretty clear that that's not really the answer. So I'm here to listen and learn and discover what candidate is going to represent not just my values, but I feel like the values that many of us share. I'll leave it at that. And I'll pass it over to Sue. Sue Scott, are you there? I see you there. She may have stepped away. How about Deborah?
Hello, I'm Deb Ford, she, her, hers. I am treasurer of Senate District 61, which is Southwest Minneapolis. It's Scott Dibble's district, Frank Hornstein, Jamie Long. And we're in the middle of all of the redistricting stuff as well. I'm here because Hennepin County races, one of the only sort of wide open races. I feel like there's nothing that's a foregone conclusion about it. And So it's of interest to me. That's why I'm here. Thanks for, and I hang out. I'm like a groupie to Edina Indivisible. Oh, and I will toss to Dylan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan McMahon. I am also with SD61. Don't have anything original to say that hasn't been said already. I'm just here to listen and learn. And I will pass it to Mark.
Hello, I'm on the board of MN03 and also Eden Prairie Indivisible. And like it's been mentioned, Hennepin County District Attorney also is so important because also outstate attorneys also head towards the Twin Cities for guidance. And so it's really important. And I want to know who I want to endorse when it comes around to, so just learning. I'll pass it on to, how about Loretta's phone? Okay,
Hello?
and, okay.
Oh, are there two Lorettas? I'm not sure.
No, you're
Nope.
good.
Well,
Just you.
Awesome. My name is Loretta Arredondo. I am a Golden Valley resident who is very interested in learning more about the Hennepin County Attorney and how it all works, and just want to be able to pick the right one.
Loretta, or how about, I'll just,
Yeah, if you
Phil.
could choose one, I'm driving.
Okay, yeah, Phil, how about you go?
Hi, everyone. Philip Adam in Plymouth, and restorative justice would be one of my passions. So certainly what many of you have said has resonated with me. I'm like Milan, that I don't know a lot about the Hennepin County Attorney does. My daughter was on the I-35W bridge when the tanker truck drove through. So have some personal connect. And then she took me to Powderhorn Park to the town hall meeting out in the park a couple summers ago. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'll pass it on to see, is JSA 529 spoken yet?
JSA 529, are you there? Maybe not. Okay. How about Teo Otten? Hope I'm saying that right.
Yep, got it right. It's Teo Otten, she, her, whatever, on that. I live up in Brooklyn Park, but have worked a lot with Clara in the original days of MN03 with doing that. So I'm a delegate to the county convention, and I'm an uncommitted delegate. I haven't made up my mind yet, obviously. And I'm one of those people that, you know, the more you know allows you to make a better informed decision.
Great,
Awesome.
okay. Sue, have you joined us yet? No? All right, well, I think that anybody who hasn't gone yet. No, okay, I think everyone who's going to speak has spoken.
Awesome. I thank you very much for that round of introductions. It's lovely to put a little bit of information behind the names and the faces that I'm seeing here. And a lot of the stuff that I'm hearing about, like wanting to know more information and trying to understand which candidates share values, all of that really resonates with me. So thrilled to have you here. You're definitely in the right spot. And now I will dive into actually covering what we'll cover. So People Over Prosecution is a 501c4 organization, which means that we can do political stuff 40% of the time, and then we do 60% educational stuff like this. We're a small nonprofit. We have 0 paid staff, all volunteer crew right now. And our genesis is actually in late May of 2020, when Mike Freeman, our current Hennepin County attorney, in the wake of Chauvin murdering George Floyd, got on national TV, violated his lawyerly ethics, and lied, saying that he hadn't charged Chauvin yet because there was evidence that proved that Chauvin is innocent. And obviously, at this point, after Chauvin's conviction, we know just how big of a lie that was. I have some really excellent, very smart friends. One's an amazing attorney who recognized the ethical violation as the basis for a recall campaign immediately and put together the legal paperwork to get that off the ground. And a really good organizing friend who did everything else so that, yeah, Freeman's big lie was on a Thursday, and by the next Wednesday, we were at George Floyd Square collecting signatures to start the process to recall Mike Freeman. The recall campaign did amazing work. We have always been an all volunteer crew. We collected around 20,000 signatures from registered voters across Hennepin County saying, yes, they agreed that Mike Freeman deserved to be recalled for his actions, which is both like an amazing number and, because power protects power, incredibly insufficient. The recall statute in Minnesota is so onerous that actually my father-in-law, who recently retired from like a 35-year career as a government reporter for the Star Tribune, called me up once he found out that I was involved in the recall campaign and was like, Minnesota doesn't do recalls. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, we don't have them here. It's like, no, we do. They just are so hard. Nobody has ever tried one in Hennepin County before. We literally were the first. We collected 20,000 signatures. We would have needed about 250,000 to pass on to the next phase of the recall process. And it became abundantly clear in October of 2020, when everybody was really busy with national elections, that we were never really going to hit that number in time to make a meaningful difference. We are very excited that the recall campaign was probably part of the milieu that made Freeman decide not to run for re-election, and opened up this amazing abundance of candidates that we have now. And we've shifted gears and are working to help elect a transformative Hennepin County attorney. And when we think about transformative Hennepin County attorney, what we mean is somebody who's literally going to transform the system and the priorities and the way this office moves to achieve actual safety and to move towards a vision of justice that cannot be shrunk to the size of a cage. The values undergirding this transformative Hennepin County attorney, and this is with credit to Danielle Sered and the organization called Common Justice that she runs out in New York City, which is a restorative justice organization specific for crimes of violence, except for intimate partner violence because the power and control stuff that gets involved, but like community violence, street violence type stuff. We borrow those values. They're our values too. We're looking for a system that is survivor-centered, safety-driven, accountability-based, and racially equitable. And I'm gonna get kind of into the, I've got like some interactive stuff, and for folks that are able to hang for the entire time, I really wanna dive into what these things mean, because they're kind of highfalutin, big nebulous terms, but there are actual specifics behind all of those. But that's our genesis, where we're at and where we're headed. Why are we focused on the Hennepin County Attorney's Office? In May of 2020, like Greg and other folks said, it became abundantly clear how big of a problem Minneapolis police are. And I think in the popular consciousness, there's a really obvious link between police and prisons. Police arrest people, people end up in prison. What a lot of people don't actually know is that there's an intermediary step in the process. Arrest doesn't have to mean prison. It doesn't have to mean anything other than the fact of the arrest. Prosecutors have 100% control over what happens after an arrest. Prosecutors decide what, they take every single police file, that they get and they decide what to do with it. Some they throw in the trash, some they send back to the police to do more investigation, beef up this or that. Other files they decide to make charges on, and prosecutors have absolute and unchecked discretion to decide what charges to bring. Sorry, as far as the ceiling goes, they have to make sure that the charges are those that there is probable cause to support in the police file, which means that it is likely that something bad happened that violated the law, and likely that the person that is alleged to have committed the crime actually did it. It's a pretty low floor. So we're focused on the Hennepin County Attorney's Office because there's a massive amount of power in the prosecutors that work there. One of the ways that that power shows up is in locking up a lot of our neighbors and friends at disproportionate rates. 19.6% of adults in Minnesota live in Hennepin County, and more than 25% of people who are in Minnesota adult prisons are from Hennepin County. Our county is uniquely focused on incarceration, our system response. And probably the disparity gets even worse when you start to factor in the number of people who are in the adult correctional facility, which is a Hennepin County jail and not part of the DOC numbers. There's a lot of power, and they were wielding it in ways that do not align with my values or the values of people over prosecution, or I suspect a lot of the values that you all hold. As far as what the Hennepin County Attorney's Office does, there is two main focuses. Foci? I don't know. I'm not that smart. Thank you, Dr. Kimberly. I saw it. Foci. On the one hand, we have civil representation of Hennepin County government in civil litigation and civil issues. The legal system is broken into three main pillars. Civil law has to do with money. It's contracts, it's any sort of tort, which is when somebody does something bad to you and you sue them and you get money from them, but they don't go to jail because you're in civil court. So the Hennepin County Attorney's Office will defend the county against civil lawsuits. They will issue guidance to the county about what sorts of contracts or what sorts of actions they can take and be on the right side of civil law. The Hennepin County attorneys, and there's about 200 attorneys in the office that focus on the civil side of the equation. That is not my area of expertise, quite obviously. And frankly, it's not super big area of interest for me. The part that we at People Over Prosecution are laser focused on is the criminal side of the equation. There are also around 200 attorneys in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office who are only prosecutors. They only charge people with crimes. And the jurisdiction that the Hennepin County Attorney's Office has over crimes in Hennepin County is broken down in a couple of different ways. For folks who are younger than 18, any type of crime, or yeah, I guess crime, any type of crime that they're alleged to have committed, that will get referred in Hennepin County, that'll get referred to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and they will deal with juvenile court and juvenile delinquency adjudications and all that. For the 18 plus adult crowd, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office has jurisdiction over alleged felonies only. Misdemeanors, petty misdemeanors, and gross misdemeanors all get from the various police departments across the county. Those will get funded or funneled into your various city attorney offices. So the Hennepin County Attorney umbrella on the criminal side of the equation, which is the one that I really care about, covers survivors of serious crime across the county. It covers the system response to youth crime in the county. Covers the system response to crimes that carry the most severe punishment. Every felony carries a minimum sentence of a year in prison or more. And it also, let's just pause and think about how bonkers big Hennepin County is and how diverse and kind of wonderful and weird it is. Like Loretto, Minnesota, there's a Hennepin County library next to like a horse farm where people go for like horse therapy because there's just land and horses. My family and I live 6 blocks from George Floyd Square, and we were like squarely in the middle of like the south side of Minneapolis. What do I have in common with folks in Loretto and out on the lakes in Minnetonka and up in Brooklyn Center and over in, you know, the boutiques in Edina and all that sort of stuff? The Hennepin County Attorney's Office has jurisdiction over all of this like diverse geographic and kind of cultural areas, which I think just adds to its importance. I'm going to pause here. I know that there were some people who needed to take off early and stuff. The next slides that I have to do with kind of a deep dive into those values. And I really want to like get to know folks and like have some discussions and stuff, but I'm actually going to bop out of order and just let you know what's coming up from People Over Prosecution, so that people who don't want to stick around for that or who have other things to do can kind of get the download. So here are some slides that we will come back to if there's time and interest later. Broadly speaking, our plans in 2022. So People Over Prosecution has invited every candidate that's entered the race to win our endorsement, which involves answering our questionnaire, doing a private screening with our board, and then participating in a public virtual forum in April. We have had 3 candidates who are interested in our endorsement. Those candidates are Mary Moriarty, Saraswati Singh, and Simon Troutman. Paul Ostro is also was excited about our questionnaire and wanted to help voters get to know him in that way, and so answered our questionnaire, but was also very clear that he is seeking nobody's endorsement in this race. So we have published answers to his questionnaire on our website, but will not be moving further into the endorsement process with him. Ryan Winkler and Martha Holton Dimmick both declined to respond to invites to connect and to invitations to go through the endorsement process with us. So in March, we are having candidate screening interviews with our board and the 3 candidates that are seeking our endorsement, Mary, Saraswati, and Simon. In April, the date is nearly final, probably April 9th, but we will be publishing this on our socials and all that. We will be having a public virtual candidate forum, and we are going to be co-hosting that with New Justice Project, which is a workers' rights, reentering citizen, and justice-involved folks organizing shop in Minneapolis. And we will also be issuing our endorsement later in April, but ahead of the county convention. And then April through November, we're going to be rocking some voter education events and text and phone banks. And I should have dropped the link in here. Where is it? So I put the meet the candidates link in the chat, and I'll drop the get involved link in the chat as well. So that y'all can sign up to join our mailing list and get these details as quickly as they pop up. And now it's so aggressive, this share is not letting me. Boom. Okay. So with that, I'm gonna pop back to the values, the top of the values slide, and I will pause and ask for questions, connections. What does all this information raise for any of y'all?
So I've just been looking at the chat, and Millen had a question about, you mentioned the 3 pillars under the HCOA, civil, criminal, and what is the 3rd one?
Yeah, sorry about that, Millen. There are actually only 2 areas of law that the Hennepin County Attorney's Office is responsible for. There's the civil representation of the county, and then there's the criminal prosecution of folks in the county. There is a 3rd area of law that gets practiced in the United States, and that's immigration.
Oh, okay.
But the Hennepin County Attorney's Office doesn't have any sort of immigration jurisdiction. Okay. There is overlap to the extent that certain types of crimes and convictions then influence immigration status and possibilities for people who are not citizens of the United States. But yeah, that's the 3rd pillar
Would that
generally.
would that be quite prevalent in, let's say, areas like New York or California, Los Angeles, where a lot of immigrants come?
And here, I mean, yeah, the way that the criminal system overlaps with the immigration system is real for neighbors that are much closer than New York and Los Angeles, I'm going to say. There's a lot of folks working on what we call crimigation issues in the Twin Cities with our neighbors who are immigrants and refugees, because certain types of criminal convictions can put up huge barriers to people becoming natural, like citizens in the United States and all that sort of stuff. So the Hennepin County Attorney's Office in an indirect way influences immigration status, but once they charge somebody with a crime or convict somebody of a crime that has those like collateral consequences, the actual follow through for who's responsible to like prosecute the immigration case goes to a different attorney outside of the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. Yes, Mark, I see your question in the chat. The candidates currently are Ryan Winkler, Mary Moriarty, Saraswati Singh, Simon Troutman, Paul Ostro, and Martha Holton Dimmick entered the race February. We've got such an abundance of candidates. It's amazing. April 9th is the delegate convention. Sorry to hear about that. We will, yeah, time's ticking. It is what it is. Other than the stuff in the chat, is there anything else? Martha Holton Dimmick, she's on our Meet the Candidates page, former judge. Yeah. Okay. So hearing no other questions, I will jump into the more interactive portion of the presentation. It's really values driven. The way the system shows up, the way people want it to show up has a lot to do with our values. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to have a rich discussion about the different values that form kind of the pillars of people over prosecution's priorities in this race. I just lost where here it is. Sharing, okay. So at the top of the presentation, I talked about 4 values. We're looking to transform a system so that it's survivor-centered, accountability-based, safety-driven, and racially equitable. And starting with that first one, curious to know if people want to just come off mute and share, but just what you think, either anything you want to share about folks who have survived harm and reported to the police or gone through the court system, or what you think a survivor-centered justice system should look like.
All right, I'll start the ball rolling. So I don't know personally someone who's survived violence, but I've been part of I'm also involved with Isaiah and Faith in Minnesota, and so in some of our work on sentencing, there have been victims who've spoken who say that what the system does is not always what the victim is looking for. They're just punishment is not necessarily what the victims want. A lot of times they want to know why. They have questions that they want answered that don't get answered with the traditional system. And again, restorative justice, if there's a chance for that, a lot of victims are in favor of that as well. So I think that the system the way it is doesn't take necessarily the needs of the victims and survivors into account.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, did I see Julie come off? Go ahead.
Yeah, I I also haven't experienced it or know anyone personally who has. However, I've listened to a number of committee hearings where people are talking about their experiences, and I think maybe similar to what Kimberly was saying was like a reoccurring theme was, I don't feel heard. I've reached out to numerous resources and I don't feel like anyone's listening. And then just a real lack of transparency in what actually is happening. So those seem like issues that could be resolved.
Yeah.
So
people made problems have people made solutions, 100%. And those are huge issues. I appreciate both of you saying that. And Dr. Kimberly, what I was thinking about while you were talking, I can't remember what it was that you said that sparked this connection for me, but did any of you see the cell phone video that somebody took? It was Officer Koenig, I think, who went to Cub Foods. Like, one of the officers who was involved in the murder of George Floyd was released on bond and was grocery shopping with his mask off in the middle of the pandemic, and was recognized by somebody who was in the grocery store who was like, "You were one of those cops. Like, can't you even say you're sorry? Don't you feel bad?" And as a former public defender, I'm like, of course he can't say he's sorry, like, especially not with the cell phone in his face. And then that was like a moment for me where some blinders started to fall away about how the system really represses the better angels of people's nature.
Yeah.
There's no way that this man can express any sort of remorse pre-trial and not have it come back to bite him in the butt later on. Like, his self-interest is in being as cold and unhuman as possible for as long as possible. And Julie, yes, everything that you're saying jives with what I've seen in work with folks who are fleeing intimate partner violence and what we see in the research writ large. So when we talk about centering survivors, there's a few key points that I want people to take away. First off, year after year after year, all sorts of agencies, FBI, Uniform Crime Response or Uniform Crime Report, Bureau of Justice Administration, there's just like all sorts of places that try and compile data on how many crimes actually occur, how many people are actually victimized by violence across the United States, and then how many reports get made to the police. Year after year, what we see is that most survivors prefer literally nothing to reporting what they survived to the police. It's about 45% of survivors of violence, steady trend, whoever pick up the phone and call 911. Most survivors who do report to the police drop out during the court process, precisely for a whole host of like valid reasons. But Julie, especially what you were talking about, and Dr. Kimberly, what you were talking about with not being well served, not being heard, feeling like what they wanted wasn't possible or wasn't taken into consideration. It's also a big time suck, and like, God help you if you actually are an hourly wage worker with kids or whatever. Like, are you really going to go to these hearings that you're required to go to, especially if at the end of the day you want somebody to be rehabilitated so that they don't commit the same harm and all they're looking at is a cage? It's a slim minority of survivors of violence who ever end up going through an entire criminal court process. And shamefully, Minnesota Judicial Branch does surveys on a regular basis, reaches out to survivors who go through the court process, and survivors are the group that are least satisfied with what criminal court is, the demands that it places on them, how heard they feel by prosecutors, by defense attorneys, by judges. It's re-traumatizing is a word that comes up on a regular basis. And there's a great resource that I linked to in the final slide of this presentation. It's called Survivors for Safety and Justice, and they've done annual or they've done national surveys and found that 70% of their respondents, people who survived violence, prefer prosecutors to focus on rehabilitation, even at the expense of securing convictions and prison sentences. Time after time after time, most survivors of violence want an intervention that makes it less likely that somebody survives what they went through. And so what POP is doing is asking questions along these lines and encouraging people to vote accordingly. You can take a look at our candidate questionnaire. I think comprehensive is a pretty good word for it. But we definitely have some questions about survivors and what the office will do to center those survivors, even those who are not looking for an incredibly punitive outcome. Another thing that I wanted to pause and mention here that I just lost. Hopefully it comes back to me and I will have like a really brilliant non sequitur later. Okay, so that's the survivor-centered piece of the equation. As far as, so another tenet that we're organizing around and that grounds our work is around creating safety. Oops. We saying the other That's an excellent question, Greg. That might be the case. I'm looking at the chat real quick. So on the safety side of things, what do people think? What do people want to share about how the system responds to harm and what that intervention does to restore folks to safety?
So paradoxically, the perpetrator of the violence needs to feel safe in being able to restore justice to the community that he violated. Am I understanding you correctly?
I think that's a fascinating fascinating framing to lead with. Absolutely. And I actually, like, one of my friends survived incarceration, was ordered to do treatment while incarcerated, and because he was in a unit and in a treatment program with people from a different gang, he was never able to talk about, be real about what was driving his substance use. He didn't make really any progress towards recovery because the recovery program in an unsafe, like, to show any sort of vulnerability is to put him and his family at risk, like real physical danger in that environment. And so he just kind of went through the motions, and it wasn't until a couple of years later when he was out and not surrounded by rival gang members and able to be honest about what was driving his use. Yeah, absolutely. Perpetrators need safety in order to get to the root cause of the problem. I remember the thing about the survivors. This is a state law issue in Minnesota. There are victim survivor resources in the form of like moving expenses reimbursement and medical bill reimbursement, all that sort of stuff that can help people leave like intimate partner violence or get the resources that they need to heal from like street violence or whatever it is. But those resources are locked behind cops and prosecutors. In order to access them, the victim or the survivor must report to the police in their jurisdiction within something like 3 months, and have that report be taken seriously enough that the police actually follow up on an investigation that gets charged by the prosecutors, and then those resources are available to the victims. And when we have a system that is so re-traumatizing and so terrible that the majority of survivors of violence prefer to have nothing to do with it, but there's this, like, these pots of money out there that are locked behind the system walls, we're we're not being survivor centered. And so one of the things that's not really within the purview of the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, but that I would love for people to know and be organizing around, is this idea that any sort of survivor deserves access to resources, no matter what door they're willing to open in order to get them. Having community-based survivor advocates and stuff have access to those resources is something that would be huge and help literally a majority of survivors. That was the thing that I wanted to mention. Bill, excellent question. Bill in the chat here is saying that the first goal of the prosecutor must be a conviction based on the evidence, and after the conviction, what influence does the prosecutor have over rehabilitation versus other outcomes? There's a couple of different pieces to that question, and every piece that I'm seeing is absolutely brilliant. First off, I don't think we have to take as a given that prosecutors' first goal should be to secure a conviction based on the evidence. That's the way it is right now. That's the incentive structure in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and in so many prosecutors' offices across the nation, that the more convictions you get, the bigger the prison sentence that you're able to secure, the faster track you are to promotion and being a manager or director of different units of crimes and stuff. And so when I was a public defender, some of the prosecutors that were like ladder climbers and stuff were very interested in piling all sorts of charges against my clients so that they get plea deals to all sorts of different things so that they could boost their stats so that maybe someday, like a year sooner, they would be like the division head for sex crimes or something like that. We could totally change the incentive structures so that prosecutors who have defendants that have the lowest recidivism rates are the ones who get like boosted into management, or prosecutors who have there's victim witness workers in every single prosecutor's office, and prosecutors that have like the best relationships with the survivors that choose to report or something like that. We can change that incentive structure. I would love for the next Hennepin County attorney to not be focused on convictions, but rather be focused on the quality. After the conviction, what influence does the prosecutor have over rehabilitation versus other outcomes? After a conviction, I'm not sure much, because what follows after conviction, if somebody isn't in a diversion program or a treatment program, what happens after a conviction is prison, which is a uniquely terrible place to expect people to rehabilitate. And I can talk about that a little bit later. I would say, it would be within the individual's kind of limited control to try and grab onto whatever rehabilitative services they can. But what prosecutors can do is get really clear and actually prioritize the evidence, which is that, oh, it's right here. It's on this slide, guys. Boom, this is the perfect time to talk about this. Did you know that every single study that has ever compared prison to a non-cage alternative intervention, such as treatment, like mental health treatment or drug treatment or diversion programs that are restorative based, every single study shows that non-cage alternatives create more safety than prison. Prison always has at least the same and usually worse recidivism rates than non-custodial alternatives. And I linked to a report that has links to like a huge meta-analysis that just came out in 2021. That was the most recent meta-analysis of these types of studies since 1995, I think. It is a criminological fact that prison across types of behavior, across types of crime, across different types of non-custodial alternatives, studied criminological fact that prison is the worst way to restore somebody to safety and get them to desist from criminal behavior in the future. So bopping over to my slide, taking that from the top, every step along the way in the criminal process is what nerds call criminogenic. Like it runs the risk of future criminal behavior. Arrests even if nothing, even if somebody, it's like a catch and release situation, somebody gets arrested and they never even get booked into jail, the fact of arrest can be destabilizing and kind of like dehumanizing enough that it increases the risk of future criminal behavior. And that's actually from a 4-pager that was written by the International Chiefs of Police, encouraging police officers to be judicious when they arrest people. Keeping people out of jail keeps people out of jail. There are studies that show that when people get stuck in jail on bail, so they're pre-trial, pre-conviction, even 24 hours in jail can be destabilizing and increases the risk of future arrest. And yeah, like I said, once we start talking about prison and prison sentences, the rehabilitative alternatives do much better than prison at reducing recidivism. And collateral consequences are everything that attaches to some sort of criminal record, such as an arrest record, a charge record, or conviction record, that aren't the direct consequences, which is the time in jail or the mandate to go to treatment or whatever. Collateral consequences, there are literally thousands of statutes that either mandate or allow discrimination against people with arrest records, with conviction records, and that lessen the likelihood that somebody with those types of records will have living wage work, will live in safe and stable housing, and will have access to what they need in order to thrive and be a safe member of our community. So collateral consequences can be really destabilizing and keep people locked into street markets and illegal activity. I'm gonna bop back into the chat. Greg, Common Justice is a really great model in the United States that deals with crimes of violence. I would encourage folks to Google that. I've got a further reading slide. And I would actually say, instead of looking at, well, yeah, if there's like, North Dakota is doing relatively well at implementing a Scandinavian model of what being in prison is like. And so people are treated much better than they are treated in Minnesota. The focus is on building relationships with people who are experiencing incarceration and on getting to the root cause of the problem. Recidivism rates are falling. It still involves being invested in cages, which isn't my favorite thing. Veterans court can be really successful. Drug courts, things like that, where people are mandated to, it's kind of a carrot and stick mentality where people, as long as they are complying with treatment that gets to the root cause of their criminal behavior, they are able to avoid conviction and prison time. Minnesota has a lot of these kind of like alternative courts. And I will say, I spent a year clerking in 3 of these courts in Hennepin County, in drug court, and a court for people escaping prostitution, and a court for people whose were like long-term chronically homeless, and that was driving a lot of the behavior that they were in contact with the system about. These types of courts are really great as long as there are resources in the community that speak to the needs of the people who are there. So like drug court, when you look at the research for that, like mid-20s, child-free, cisgender, Protestant, white, middle-class dudes do real well. They have a treatment bed that matches their culture and their background and speaks their literal language and whatever. They have a treatment bed wherever they need it in the state of Minnesota. And God help you if you are a queer Native mom addicted to whatever, try and find a bed. Try and find a treatment bed that is like culturally appropriate, that like shares your values, that allows your kids to be there, all that sort of stuff. So like the success and failure rates of these problem solving courts, of these like alternative courts, really depends on everybody in the community really lifting up the like intervention resources that are culturally meaningful and accessible for the people that are experiencing the issue and who need the intervention. So that's my little mini rant on those courts. I think they're excellent when there's equitable resources in the community. Alternative, you all have excellent questions in the chat. Fascinating. Okay. Philip, I'm not sure about why it's more difficult for children to visit parents in prison. Are you transportation issues or people getting sent further away? Can you say a little bit more about where you're coming from with that question?
I'm secondary to it. I have friends who would transport children to their parents who were in prison, and it was just much more difficult to they just told me anecdotal stories that it was much more difficult to do it, and prison wardens were no longer allowing it to happen. It was like another wall or barrier they had to jump through to try and do it. That's all I know.
Yeah, is it that like post-pandemic? Because I know a lot of in-person
No,
visits.
this was prior to the pandemic.
Okay.
It was like the jail got a new warden, and so I just knew of I'm a part of a men's group, and some of the men in that group do that kind of work, and it was too difficult to do.
I'm really sorry to hear that. And yeah, I'm not sure what's driving that. Dr. Kimberly, that's an excellent question. The outcomes, the effect of incarceration for children of those who are incarcerated. I appreciate you bringing that up, because yeah, the incarceration is not just an issue for the person who's living in a cage. It's families, it's neighbors, it's friends, it's our communities, it's our loved ones. And children who have had a parent incarcerated pretty much at any point in their life have a lot worse outcomes across like mental health, physical health, economic stability later in life, all of that sort of stuff. It's a hugely traumatic and destabilizing event to be separated from caregivers in that way. There's a coalition called Minnesota Strengthening Families Affected by Incarceration. My old day job, Wilder Research, has some infographics about what that looks like, how those outcomes impact kids in Minnesota. And one of the things that we know from the Minnesota homeless study, the last time that was run in 2018, so the average first age of homelessness for people who are homeless in Minnesota tends to be like mid-20s. And that age falls younger and younger the more adverse childhood experiences one has. And so as one has like 5 adverse childhood experiences, maybe they experience or homelessness at age like 20 or something like that. Except if somebody has only one adverse childhood experience, and that adverse childhood experience was that their parent was incarcerated at any point during their childhood, just that one, they never were exposed to violence, there was never addiction in the home, they don't have like a parent with a chronic illness or anything, just one parent was incarcerated while they were a kid, the average first age of homelessness is 16. It's impossible to overstate how harmful it is. And actually, Minnesota had a pretty awesome win at the legislature last year, where pregnant people and recently postpartum people are no longer mandatorily separated from their newborns. If somebody's pregnant while incarcerated, as they reach the perinatal, like approaching delivery stage, they're allowed to be shifted to a community-based alternative. And after they give birth, their newborn is allowed to be with them. Which is so crucial. Milland, excellent question about alternatives to arrests. It's really hard to like open up our imagination and think like, what does it look like to know that something terrible happened and like not call the cops or like get them involved? There's a phenomenal little organization in Minneapolis called REP MPLS. that is 100% community-based responses to nonviolent stuff, which is the majority of any police department's work anyway. But non-emergent, nonviolent situations, there are community-based care workers that can come. I see a couple of folks around the neighborhood, struggling with like chemical dependency and stuff like that. And absolutely love that I'm able to call people who are interested in, like, whose primary focus is care and help and don't have access to warehouse people in a jail. So yeah.
Would those include community resource officers?
I'm sorry, one more time.
CROs, community resource officers?
Community resource officers, you mean like embedded in a police department? Research is continually clear that the right response for the right problem gets better outcomes. And so where we have police officers that are trying to implement something that's like kinder, softer, it is better than just the armed police officer showing up. But it's not as good as the mental health professional who never went through police training and didn't want to be a police officer or whatever it is. So actually funneling resources into true community-based responses and not into police officers who are trying to be community-based responses or people who have like law enforcement authority and wear the community-based like hat, these outcomes tend to be better. Does that get to your question? Okay, awesome. Julie. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about your question, Julie?
Well, and if you need to move on, that's fine. I was kind of on your last slide, just thinking about this question of recidivism. And my understanding is that Minnesota has a pretty high rate of recidivism, around like 25%. And one of the, based on what I've read, like people who are convicted of drug charges and go to prison, aren't necessarily helped if they're addicts. So they get out, and then if they're still struggling with an addiction, it's just a cycle, right? And it's a cycle that seems to benefit no one. It doesn't benefit the individual who's arrested. And I don't know this, but like, I'm sure there are instances where they are not harmful to anyone. But they are convicted based on possession of an illegal substance. So I'm just wondering, does the county attorney have the ability to determine where are we going to focus our energies?
Yes.
Kind of like, in St. Paul that John Chow has talked. Troy, thank you.
Yeah.
Is getting a lot of heat. And I don't know if this is right or wrong, but he's sort of made this decision to say, while somebody might be breaking a traffic law, we're not going to go there. So anyway, I don't know. This is a very convoluted thing, but I guess I'm trying to get at this piece about how can that be thought about differently? And as we look at candidates, how should we be thinking about that?
Excellent questions. And yeah, I want to first and foremost really affirm what you're thinking. Prosecutors have massive amounts of discretion. The elected prosecutor can set policy. One of the things maybe maybe you don't about Mike Freeman is that after his office rightly caught a lot of flack for felonizing a whole bunch of young Black people who got caught up in stings for small amounts of marijuana possession. After that happened in 2018, he kind of backpedaled and was like, okay, we're not going to we hear that the community doesn't like this, and we're not going to bring charges based just on marijuana possession below a certain threshold from here on out. Prosecutors absolutely have the authority to decide where to put their resources, what types of crimes, like just because something is a crime on the books doesn't give a prosecutor a mandate. They don't have to charge anybody with anything. And really all we have to do is look at Trump to know that that's the case. Like, this is a man with credible rape accusations going back decades and fraud and what, like, who has never been charged with a crime. So yeah, what Choi is doing is a reflection of the priorities that his office has, and it is absolutely within our Hennepin County Attorney's discretion to decide which types of crimes deserve, like, they're really like, I'm gonna charge them all the heck response, and what sorts of crimes and behaviors are gonna get diversion offers, which is like prosecutors looking at a file, seeing a big mess of problems, calling up the person that would be the defendant and saying, hey, look, if you go through this diversion program and you get to the root of your issue, I'm never going to charge anything that comes out of this file. And if you don't do that, then I might charge you with X, Y, or Z. That's every single prosecutor has that authority, and they should be using it better. And I appreciate you bringing that up. I want to do a quick time check. We're like halfway through the values that POP is grounded in. I'm liking the discussion and the questions and stuff, but want to make sure that you all are getting what you want out of this. So I'm going to stop sharing and just kind of look at your beautiful faces and names. We good? Should we keep rolling? Or do people want to take the discussion in a different direction?
I think one question I will want to know is, I've got some acquaintances on Facebook that are fear-based. We need a bigger hammer, and that'll solve everything. And we know that won't happen, but what's the most effective way to unframe their or deframe their fear-based hammer message?
Oh, person by person, heart by heart, move by move. It's, I mean, those are conversations that I'm, still having with my father-in-law and, all sorts of people who are very dear to me. And I think there's a couple of things that have helped me through, kind of like get through to folks. One is to kind of personalize the issue and start by sharing a time that, like, maybe you made a terrible mistake and somebody was like, yo, Phil, what are you doing? Like, let's help you know the impact of your action and get you what why did you do that? What do you need to not do that again? Versus like cut you out of my life forever and never talking to you again because Phil's terrible and irredeemable now. And like, what does that response feel like? I mean, we're sitting here as, grown kids. We all know what it's like to be punished for something versus like invited to be held accountable. I think this is a really good segue to my next slide, but for me, getting vulnerable about my own experiences when people have approached me with a punishment mentality versus I love you dearly and you are important and I want you to do better mentality. And then getting curious with the other person about like, how has that ever shown up in your life? And which one do you prefer? And why might it be that for some groups of people, like, who does it benefit that you think that everybody in North Minneapolis deserves to be thrown in a cage? Is that actually helping you and your family? Or yeah, I don't know. It's hard and it's personal, I guess, are my two main points. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that politicians are going to have to, obviously that works on a one-on-one at the door, or that's what you have to do at the door, one-on-one. But at some point, there's going to have to be a public messaging by Moriarty or Ryan Winkler, whomever, that diffuses that debunks that fear and hate mentality as well.
Yeah, and they are going to have an easier time doing it the more that we are willing to engage with our friends and family around these issues. And I follow a dude on Twitter who pretty much every day posts, I can't remember his name, but he posts these terrible facts that like today across the United States, employers will steal $25 million of wages from low-wage workers, and the very rich will commit billions of dollars worth of tax fraud. And the stuff that you're going to read about in crime and punishment news is, you know, about somebody who steals some steaks from Trader Joe's and cops rounding up folks who are, you know, stealing diapers from Walmart, and street level violence, which is totally preventable when communities have what they need. Yeah.
Lindsay, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on, you know, in January of this year, there were 5 mayors from Maple Grove, Crystal, Plymouth, I think was one of them. Police chiefs, not police chiefs, mayors actually signed a letter and wrote to the county attorney, Hennepin County Attorney, to get tougher on crime. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Can you give us your thoughts on that?
I think it was a really excellent finger pointing move. It was maybe very politically expedient and very easy for these mayors to do this, to shore up some support in their cities. I think it's absolutely, I know it's absolutely counterfactual. What they were asking the Hennepin County Attorney to do was invest in more of the same, which would give us more of the same. I recently left Wilder Research after 5 years. My focus there was on community safety and effective violence intervention, and broken down very, very simply, safe communities are communities where people have what they need. Research proves that safe communities, communities with low levels of interpersonal violence, the things that they have in common are thriving wage work, connected youth, excellent education, you know, economic stability, neighborhood connections, all of that sort of stuff. And we can look at community indicators to figure out which communities have those things and which communities don't, or we can look at police reports and figure it out. And if we invest more in police and prosecutors and cages, we are going to get more of the inequities on the back end of the punishment system with who gets funneled and caught, while all the white collar criminals are like skating and stealing and free. And we're going to be pouring money into punishment that should be put into prevention.
Can you repeat the 3? Thriving wage work?
I'm going to do you one better at the end of I'm going to link to some of my stuff that has this put a little bit better, but yeah, thriving wage work, economic stability is a big bucket. Neighborhood cohesion is a big bucket of safety. So where there's like high rates of home ownership and neighborhood connections, engaged youth. So when we think about when certain types of crime started to spike up in the cities, and how young folks were, and how that happened right on the tail of all these supports and programs going away because of the pandemic, it's not surprising. Yeah.
Oh, so I just, and maybe you'll get to it. I just want to be sure that we don't leave before we talk about the fact that the criminal justice system across the country, but in Minnetonka in particular, disproportionately puts people of color behind bars.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kimberly. I'm going to start sharing again and we'll jump ahead. Or to the foundation, I guess, of the whole thing. Accountability is great. We want that. We don't want punishment. Accountability actually works. We envision a system that is racially equitable. We envision a world that's racially equitable. It's not its own pillar of things. It is the foundation of everything in our white capitalist patriarchy. I'm sorry, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So yeah, what do people know? What do people want to share about race inequity in our punishment system? What would it look like to have a racially equitable system? Where are folks at with that?
Well, so if we're, if we're still using the cage system, when we go and look in our cages, they should be reflective of the general population. So if the population is 4% Black, you shouldn't see more than 4% of the people in jail that are Black.
That is a simple metric. Abso-freaking-tutely. Yes. And we know that that's not the case. We know that safety and punishment are distributed along unjust, racist, misogynist, classist, heteronormative, like homophobic, all these axes of privilege and oppression. You'll get a slide with a link to the end. What I was just talking about with Phil dovetails really nicely with this point, Dr. Kimberly. In my work at Wilder Research, we did an analysis in Brooklyn Park of where the social conditions where safety thrives are present and not present. And surprise, not a surprise, white people and rich people in Brooklyn Park are much more likely than Black people and poor people in Brooklyn Park to live saturated in the conditions where safety thrives. It was August of 2015. I was in North Minneapolis at a anti-national night out sort of thing. It was a safety beyond policing, like community gathering. And there was a young teenage Black girl who got up on the stage and said, here in North Minneapolis, we have tons of enforcement and no security, and my cousins in Minnetonka have all security and no enforcement. When we invest in communities and in these social conditions for safety, we get much better outcomes. A couple of other terrible factoids about race inequities in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. Andy Mannix in the Star Tribune had an article at the end of 2021. White people in Minneapolis comprised 60% of the city's population, and in 2021, 75% of murder victims were Black or Somali, and an additional 11% of murder victims where the race were known was non-white and Hispanic. Violence is not, the conditions that foment violence are not equally distributed across races. The conditions that cultivate safety are not equally distributed across races and places. Another horrible factoid. Aiding and abetting felony murder is this really bonkers doctrine and a really great example, terrible example of prosecutorial discretion in Minnesota, where if I help you commit a felony and someone dies during the course of the felony because of homicidal acts you committed, I can be charged with murder. It's a confluence of a couple stupid legal doctrines. We know based on recent data that in Minnesota, 9% of the population is Black, and nearly half of all charges under this bonkers stupid doctrine are against Black people, and 62% of the convictions in this terrible doctrine that allows somebody who never murdered anybody and maybe didn't even intend for anybody to kill, 62% of the time that somebody like that is convicted of murder, it's a Black person. There are terrible racial inequities in our systems. And like I said, people over prosecution, we're asking candidate questions along these lines. I think really pointed questions and really good ones have to do with the fact that the vast majority of people who are impacted either by not being privileged and living in the conditions that foment violence, and so surviving violence, and people who get caught in the system are more likely to be Black. These are the people who are least likely to be voting and like holding, like kind of centered in who the prosecutor thinks about when they think about who am I accountable to. But they're the people who are really impacted. So what is our next Hennepin County attorney going to do to focus on the impact that they have, even though the voices and the power is really consolidated among the people that they don't ever impact? We've got questions along those lines in our questionnaire, and I would encourage you all to think about that sort of stuff too. And getting back to Phil's question about what to do when there's all this reactionary, tough on crime sort of stuff, really parsing that there is a difference between punishment and accountability is something that I found to be effective during like interpersonal communications, and also like as a parent with a 7-year-old who makes mistakes. So looking at time, I'm just going to kind of run my mouth, and please feel free to, interrupt with questions or comments and connections and stuff. The key difference for me between punishment and accountability is all about power. Punishment is a response where we see that somebody used their power in a way that wasn't good, and so we take all their power away and we put our power on top, and now they suffer a bad consequence. And through that, we hope that they learn to avoid doing that thing. But really what we know that people learn is to avoid doing that thing in a way that the punisher finds out about it. It doesn't teach them new skills. It doesn't teach them a different way of being. It just teaches them, oh shit, if that person finds out that I did that, I'm in trouble. And so I'm gonna try and not have them find out about it. Accountability recognizes that in order for somebody to grow in a positive direction so that they never commit that harm again, they have to use their own power. They have to look inside themselves, figure out what went wrong, and be supported in making better choices in the future. So accountability isn't about avoiding the harm. Accountability is about leaning into what the impact was, figuring out why the person had that negative impact, and helping them get on the right path. It's about harnessing power in a different direction.
Like wearing a mask and getting vaccinated? Sorry, I digress.
Love the pandemic connections. Absolutely. And for me, accountability is kind of a doublespeak when it comes to the system, because there's accountability for the individuals who get caught up in the system. We want them to learn to be their own judges, right? We want them to learn to have better coping mechanisms than substance abuse or violence or whatever it is. But accountability is also about the system, because the system, like we've just talked about, has perpetrated vast harms. It's really hard to overstate. So we're super clear that there are many types of harm interventions that do better than cages to achieve individual accountability. Prisons are uniquely terrible places to achieve accountability. At an individual level, the 4 biggest risk factors that would increase the risk that I would be violent are isolation, shame, exposure to violence, inability to meet my economic needs. What does prison have? What are the 4 walls of prison? Isolation, shame, inability to meet economic needs, and exposure to violence. Prison is a terrible place to expect people to learn to desist from violence. It is criminogenic. And there are ways, so that's on the individual level. And there are also like lots of ways that prosecutors can show up to hold the system accountable for past harms and reduce the risk of future harms. Julie, when you were talking about the discretion that prosecutors have, and I think it was Greg in the chat talking about, or maybe it was Milan talking about different incentives to secure convictions. Something that I would love to see in our next Hennepin County Attorney's Office is a conviction integrity unit, where young prosecutors are assigned to go through old cases and make sure that no bad cops, no liar cops were involved in securing the convictions, and that sentences are actually safety driven and not over punishing people. And where prosecutors, you can set up conviction integrity units so that the prosecutors who find the most problems that the office has meted out in the past and correct them are the ones who get like promoted and advanced. Though that would be an excellent incentive structure. Many different ways that prosecutors can promote police accountability. One of the things that they could do when MPD was over on East Lake hunting Minneapolitans, a prosecutor could find out the name of every single cop that was on that SWAT team that was hunting Minneapolitans, and refuse to bring cases that are based solely on that cop's testimony or investigation. When Mike Freeman's office saw the body cam video in Jaleel Stallings' case and charged Jaleel Stallings and didn't pick up the phone and call Arredondo and ask what the hell he was going to do to discipline the officers, that was a missed opportunity for police accountability. There's ways that prosecutors can get involved. Something that we've talked to a couple of the candidates about is having prosecutors that are dedicated to getting really good with the policies and procedures of the manuals of the different police departments in Hennepin County, and being responsible for getting in touch with the various police chiefs when they see police reports and the dash cam and body cam video and stuff that shows the officers are violating those policies, letting them know that these are officers of concern that will be like persona non grata and not allowed to bring testimony or something like that until the chief has retrained or issued discipline or whatever they need to do. Another piece of the equation that I really hope people learn about and get more knowledge around is the Minnesota County Attorneys Association. What is it, like 87 counties in Minnesota? Every single one of them has an elected county attorney that has vast criminal jurisdiction. And they all get together and they lobby the state to do stuff, to change laws. And it would be great if we had more eyes on what our elected county attorney was lobbying our state legislature to do. I have my eyes on a couple of awesome bills around reforming aiding and abetting felony murder. The County Attorneys Association has been a big blocker there. There's a lot of ways that the Minnesota County Attorneys Association needs to show up and do better. And one of my visions for accountability is that our next Hennepin County attorney would be transparent about what their role is on the MCAA and what they're pushing for at the state level. So, oof. There's a lot of words from my faces to yours. Recap: March and April are big months for people over prosecution, and we do really want to see you on our email list so that we can reach out and get you engaged in text and phone banks and stuff. I'll drop these links in the chat, and here's my big old further reading slide. Fill a lot of what you were asking about as far as social conditions for safety are going to be in this third and fourth bullet here. We've got excellent local research too at the Minnesota Justice Research Center. And here's just, some links for further reading. So I'm going to stop sharing. Trust that y'all will get the slides. Yeah, questions, connections, what's up?
Can I state back something that I think you have said to make sure I got it right?
Yeah.
That there's a lot of reform that has to happen.
Yeah.
And that some really large percentage of it can be done by the way that the Hennepin or any county attorney decides to operate their office. Like you could be 80% of the way there if you got the right person there. Right? Is that true?
Yes.
Not an exact percentage necessarily, but it's not. State laws would be nice, but you could do this with having the right person there to model this and make it the state of the art and best current, most humane justice system in the country. Yes,
absolutely. A conviction integrity unit, a police accountability unit, and then 90% of the cases go to great diversion, and that would be for me the three-legged stool of best practices and moving in the right direction.
One of our problems is that everybody in the suburbs hates that idea. Not everybody.
Perfect.
But a lot of people hate that idea because they're just afraid. And it's fear. And what they're afraid of is crime. And crime comes in waves by itself, regardless of what anybody does. It will come in waves because the conditions work that way. Almost anything random comes in waves ultimately, because that's how things organize themselves. And when the waves come, the press jumps on it. It's the best press you can get. The best press, the best thing you can put on the front page of your newspaper is something about crime increasing. There's nothing better than that. And on a regular day-to-day basis. And then that is the fear then becomes political meat. And then when the crime wave goes away by itself, which is almost always how that they go away, then everybody gets to take credit for it. And everybody has been retrained or has now been reinforced the idea that the problem is a crime.
Yeah, no,
So
it's
that's got to be broken. That part of that enforcement against the reason why everything you say, which makes sense, can't happen easily is because nobody wants it to happen because they all think something else is going on.
nobody wants it to happen for everybody else. Everybody wants it to happen for them and their family and their kids.
And that's a really good point that I also heard you make that I think I hadn't heard before. That's a really important point.
Yeah.
Repeat the three-legged stool.
Conviction integrity unit, police accountability unit, 90% of everything else goes to diversion.
Diversion, 90% goes.
Okay, so before we leave, I want to make sure. So Lindsay, were you going to put the link to the slides in the chat?
Yes, I need to make it so that y'all can't go in there and edit.
Right.
So bear with me for a
That's
hot second.
fine. Take your time. So while you're doing that, so Plymouth Area Indivisible is going to be having candidate forums with the Hennepin County Attorney candidates. One with Ryan Winkler has already been scheduled. And Greg, do you have that? I think Greg's looking for that. And then one with Saraswati Singh has also been scheduled, but like she just confirmed right before we came on for this. So that the link isn't set for that yet, but watch in your Indivisible spaces and we will get those out. There, okay. Millen, you're muted.
Yeah. Does anyone know what Saraswati means?
No, what does it mean?
It's the goddess of education in our Hindu culture.
Oh.
Yes.
Ah,
cool.
You know, God, there are so many gods and most of them have meanings, I guess. You know, Saraswati is the goddess of education.
so that's a great name to have.
Yeah.
Oh.
I imagine there's some god names that are less great to have.
Probably. Okay, so yeah, so we've got all the links in the chat. Click on them all. I haven't been keeping track, so I don't even know how everyone signed up. People that we have emails for, we can send a follow-up email to with these links. But if we don't have your email, then you will not get a follow-up.
So I guess people could send their email privately to Greg or Kimberly or.
I put the link to the form for the email.
Oh, okay.
Right, or sign up, fill out the form.
Yeah,
We'll
forms in
send
there.
stuff to you.
And then you'll know what's coming when. Yeah. I just have one comment, and it doesn't have anything to do with county attorney. I have a cousin who's got a grandson who trained to be a police officer. Did not get on a force, lives in a real small place, so there aren't that many opportunities. So he became a beginner in the prison system as a guard. And he left. He said it was the worst thing ever. Which I don't want to say everybody that stays in the system as a guard in a prison is a terrible person, but there's a selection process there.
There's a selection process. I've had the opportunity to work in some prisons, and other people have probably done a lot more work than I have. But it's not even just a selection process. Darwinian selection process in a sense, because it often is a small town where that's the job. And it's, and if you're a guard in Walpole, if you're a guard in Dannemora, if you're a guard in Attica, your father was too. And so was your grandfather, and so was your grandfather, and so was your brother, and so was your cousin. That's what I've noticed, at least in New York. That's where I've had learned that. I don't know what it's like here.
Yeah, well, my relatives are in New York
I know.
too, so there you
Yeah.
So first we should probably stop recording. I think we're done with the